Okay, so STEM, right. Everybody's talking about it, but what's the real deal? We've got these lectures from Professor Weaver, and I gotta say, the guy's got energy. Let's dive in and see what he's got for us.
You know, what struck me about Professor Weaver is how he goes beyond just listing those four STEM fields.
Right.
It's like he's saying, hey, there's this whole underlying system here.
This hidden framework.
Yeah, exactly. He uses this analogy of a box.
Okay, I remember that.
Like, imagine this box. You've got stuff going into the box. That's your input, right?
The ingredients, kind of?
Yeah. Then there's something happening inside the box, a process,
Transforming those ingredients.
Exactly. And then out the other side, you've got your output, your result.
And he used, like, Italian dressing to explain cell walls or something.
Right. He compares a cell wall to Italian dressing. I know it sounds crazy, but it totally makes sense when you think about it. You've got your oil and vinegar, like, they need a boundary, right?
Yeah, they separate.
Exactly, just like a cell needs its wall. But then there's also this exchange happening.
Flavors mixing, like in the dressing.
Right, just like nutrients passing through a cell membrane, and that system's thinking.
Seeing how all those pieces connect.
Exactly.
So it's not just about knowing a bunch of scientific facts.
No, not at all.
It's about how you use that knowledge.
It's about what you do with it. Professor Weaver, he breaks it down like this. Science. That gives us the parts, the facts, the building blocks.
Okay.
Engineering, that's where we take those parts and we build something.
We make something.
Exactly. And then there's math, right? Math helps us figure it all out, measure it, make sense of the data.
And then technology, that's like the tool that comes out at the end.
Precisely. The tool, the outcome, yeah.
So it's really this team effort, not just isolated fields.
It's this dynamic interplay between them. That's what makes STEM so powerful.
So, like with those rapid COVID tests, that's a good example.
Perfect example. You've got scientists who understand the virus, how to detect it. Then you've got the engineers who design these intricate little tests.
Yeah.
And then the math comes in to analyze all that data, track the spread.
Yeah.
And technology, well, that's the lab equipment, the software that's processing those millions of tests.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. And Professor Weaver himself, he's not just a chemist, is he?
Oh, no, not at all. He talks about programming, sensor technology, teaching.
Right.
He's like the embodiment of that jack-of-all-trades spirit.
He's got all the tools in the STEM belt, which reminds me, he's really into measurement.
And that might seem basic, but it's absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Measurement is how we make STEM useful.
It bridges that gap between theory and real-world impact, right?
Exactly.
He's got that great line, no data, no proof, no progress.
I love that. He uses this very relatable example of wanting to know the temperature of his coffee.
Okay.
How do we go from, ooh, this feels hot, to an actual number we can rely on?
Right. It can't just be a feeling.
There's a whole system involved.
Yeah.
You've got the coffee itself, the thing you want to measure, which is the temperature.
Okay.
You've got the transducer, the thermometer in this case. And then you've got the model, which is the scale on the thermometer that helps us interpret that data.
So the measurement system, it takes what we observe and turns it into usable knowledge.
Exactly. And that knowledge helps us make better decisions, solve problems, understand the world around us more deeply.
It's like they say, you can't manage what you can't measure.
Precisely. And it's not just about measuring coffee temperature.
Right.
This applies to everything, from the tiniest particles to, like, how well a new medical treatment works.
Professor Weaver goes deep on some pretty wild measurement techniques.
He does.
Like mass spectrometry, chromatography.
And he ties it all back to the history of science, which I find so fascinating. Like, did you know that chromatography, which is this technique for separating mixtures,
Yeah.
it actually got its start from studying the colors of fall leaves?
Like, really?
Yeah. Scientists were looking at those beautiful reds, yellows, and oranges.
Wow.
And they figured out they could separate those pigments.
That's amazing.
And that same principle, it's now used in sophisticated labs to separate components in a blood test, for example.
Mind blown.
It's all about those underlying principles at play.
So cool.
And you know where things get even more interesting? Software. It's everywhere in science now.
Software. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, think of it as the conductor of the orchestra,
Let's see.
controlling all the instruments, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Right.
Professor Weaver talks about LabVW. Have you heard of that?
LabVW. Yeah, vaguely.
Right.
Isn't that something scientists and engineers use?
Yeah, it's this programming environment. Scientists and engineers use it to control their instruments, collect data, analyze results, all that.
So it's like the tool that ties all the other STEM tools together.
Exactly. And get this, LabUW, it's not just used in some high-tech lab somewhere.
Yeah.
It's used in research labs around the world. The same tools they're using to, like, launch rockets could be analyzing your next blood test.
Wow, that's wild. It really shows how accessible this stuff is
Yeah,
becoming.
absolutely. But Professor Weaver, he doesn't want us to get stuck just thinking about labs.
Okay.
He takes this idea of environment and really pushes us to think bigger.
Bigger, how so?
Like STEM, it's not just happening in a controlled lab setting, right?
Yeah.
It's happening in wind tunnels, on the ocean floor, even on Mars.
A wind tunnel?
Yeah.
That's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think of STEM, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a ton of science behind that.
Absolutely. Think about the challenges there.
Yeah, like how do you even begin to measure something as invisible and unpredictable as airflow?
Exactly.
He talked about this pressure-sensitive paint they use in wind tunnels.
Oh, yeah. It's incredible.
It like changes color based on the air pressure.
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But that's how they visualize and measure those aerodynamic forces, right? It's adapting those STEM tools to these crazy environments.
And it's not just about designing the tools themselves, right?
Hmm.
It's also about handling these massive amounts of data they're getting.
Exactly. That's where things like LabUW come back in. You need software to control the instruments, collect the data, make sense of it all. It's taking something incredibly complex and making it understandable.
And then they use that understanding to design better planes, wind turbines, cars.
Precisely. It's amazing, isn't it, how STEM is just woven into everything around us.
It really is.
And he doesn't stop at wind tunnels. Then Professor Weaver takes us underwater.
Underwater, like the ocean.
Yep. Talking about exploring the deepest parts of the ocean using remotely operated vehicles, those underwater drones.
Oh, yeah, those things are incredible. The pressure alone at those depths, it's mind-boggling.
Right. It's a completely alien environment. And yet those same STEM principles, they still apply.
It really highlights that STEM isn't about memorizing a bunch of facts.
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to creatively solve problems wherever they pop up.
Like Professor Weaver says, it's about pushing boundaries.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we've got these amazing tools. Now let's go to the most extreme environments imaginable and see what we can do.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop there.
No.
Nope. He takes us all the way to Mars.
Of course he does. Talk about an extreme environment.
Right.
The Mars rover, it's like this perfect example of STEM in action, this mobile science lab on another planet.
It really is mind-blowing when you think about it.
The collaboration, the teamwork that must go into something like that.
It really does take a village, right?
It does. You've got your scientists who are studying Mars. You've got your engineers who built the rover itself.
The mathematicians who are analyzing all that data coming back from the rover.
The programmers who are writing the code that allows it to function.
Right. And it's really inspiring, I think, because it shows that STEM, it's not just this exclusive club.
Right. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to appreciate this stuff.
Exactly.
Or to contribute to it.
Absolutely. You know, anyone, no matter their background, they can find their place in STEM.
It's about finding that passion, developing your skills, and then using those skills to make a difference.
And Professor Weaver, he makes it clear that this journey, it's never really over, is it?
There's always more to learn, more to explore, more to create.
Exactly. And he leaves us with this great challenge at the end of his lectures.
What's that?
He wants us to find our own coffee temperature problem.
Coffee temperature problem. Okay, that sounds kind of cryptic, like some kind of riddle.
It's like he's saying, what are you curious about? What problems do you see in your own life, in the world around you?
Okay, I like that.
And then how can you use these tools, this STEM way of thinking, to find a solution?
So it doesn't have to be something huge, like curing cancer or solving climate change.
Not at all. It could be something small, like figuring out a better way to organize your desk.
Right, or like optimizing your morning routine.
Exactly. Or it could be something that impacts your community.
Or something global.
Right. The point is that these STEM principles, this way of thinking, it can be applied to problems of all sizes.
It's about taking that spark of curiosity and turning it into something real.
Yeah.
Something that can make a difference. It's a powerful message. But I think a lot of people, they hear this and they think, okay, that's great, but where do I even begin?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Professor Weaver gives us this incredible toolbox, all these inspiring examples, but then it's up to us to take that and actually do something with it.
Yeah, it can feel a little overwhelming.
It can.
Like, where do we start?
Well, it's about shifting our perspective a bit, I think.
Okay.
It's about going from passively observing the world
Yeah.
to actively engaging with it.
And that's really what these lectures are all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just the what of STEM, but the how.
Exactly.
He's giving us a framework for approaching the world, for lifelong learning,
Yeah.
problem solving.
And that, I think, is a gift that's far more valuable than any single scientific discovery, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's a gift that keeps on giving. It empowers us to shape our own future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Professor Weaver's lectures, we're left with this challenge, this call to action, right?
To find our coffee temperature problem.
Yes. To look at our lives, at the world around us, and ask ourselves, what if?
It's like he's saying, here's a magnifying glass. Go explore.
I love that image. And it doesn't have to be some big, complicated research project, right?
Not at all. He's saying you don't need a lab coat and a bunch of fancy equipment.
Right.
You can be a systems thinker in your everyday life.
Okay, but HLW, where do we even start? I'm not building a Mars rover in my backyard anytime soon.
Well, Professor Weaver would say start with observation.
Observation, okay? Like a scientist in the lab.
Exactly. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Really look at it.
Okay, and what am I looking for exactly?
Think back to those inputs and outputs we talked about.
Right, the box analogy.
Yes. What are the inputs, the factors that are contributing to this problem? What's the desired output, the solution you're aiming for? And what's the current process, the thing that's maybe not working so well?
Okay, so like, let's say my problem is I'm always running late in the mornings.
Okay, I think we can all relate to that.
Right. So my desired out TPUT would be to get to work on time, feeling calm, cool, collected, all that.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
So what are the inputs, the things that are making you late? Is it a crazy morning routine, hitting the snooze button too many times? Or is it something outside your control, like traffic?
Yeah, I can see how breaking it down like that is helpful. It's less overwhelming when you can pinpoint the causes.
Exactly. And by identifying those inputs, you can start to see where you might be able to make a change.
Right, like maybe the process itself needs to be adjusted.
Yeah.
Like, could I create a more efficient morning routine?
There you go. Or maybe it's about the environment.
Oh, right, like Professor Weaver talked about. Sometimes it's not just about changing yourself, but changing your surroundings.
Exactly. So in your case, maybe it's finding a different route to work.
Even if it's just slightly faster.
Yeah. Or adjusting your work schedule, if that's possible, to avoid the worst traffic.
Right, right. Okay, so I've observed the problem. I've identified those inputs, outputs.
Yeah.
What's next? Do I just jump in and start trying things?
Well, yes and no. This is where experimentation comes in.
Okay, so test out different solutions.
Exactly. But approach it like a scientist would.
So in my morning routine example, I try a new routine for a week and see if I actually get to work on time.
Yes. But here's the key, and Professor Weaver emphasizes this. You have to measure the results.
Can't just go on gut feeling.
Nope. Get some data. Maybe track how long it actually takes you to get ready with this new routine, or use a time tracking app, something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like the coffee temperature analogy.
Exactly.
We can't just guess how hot the coffee is.
Yeah.
We need the thermometer to know for sure.
And just like in a real experiment, it's okay if your first try doesn't work perfectly.
Oh, for sure.
In fact, it probably won't.
Right. I mean, even those big scientific breakthroughs, they usually come after years of trial and error.
Exactly. It's about being persistent, about learning from what doesn't work, and adjusting your approach.
So you're saying even the experts don't have all the answers right away.
Exactly. So don't get discouraged if that new morning routine doesn't magically solve everything. Just keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep refining.
It's really about shifting your mindset, isn't it?
It is.
Seeing challenges as opportunities.
Exactly.
Whether it's a scientific breakthrough or just, like you said, trying to make your mornings less chaotic.
It's about curiosity. It's about breaking things down. It's about experimenting and not being afraid to fail a few times along the way.
So what you're saying is Professor Weaver might have started out talking about STEM, but he's really given us a blueprint for, like, how to live a more fulfilling life.
I think so. It's about becoming an active participant, not just a passive observer.
Asking questions, looking for answers, and never stopping experimenting. I like it.
And who knows what we might discover along the way, right?
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Professor Weaver's lectures,
We're left with a challenge.
a call to action, really. to find our own coffee temperature problem, to look at our lives, our work, our communities with those fresh eyes.
And to always stay curious.
And never underestimate the power of a little systems thinking.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.